Welcome everyone to the Suited Realtor podcast platform. I'm Nawroz, and today we are diving into a topic that's not only timely but also essential in the world of real estate and beyond: life-centered design, or LCD. I'm excited to have Neslihan Kaytan from Interface, a leader in design and sustainability. Neslihan, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for the invitation and thank you for the opportunity. I'm quite excited to be here.
Thank you. So let's dive right into it, Neslihan. So, life centered design sounds fascinating, but it's like a big abstract concept to some. So, if you can define it in such a way that our listeners can understand if they are hearing for the first time.
Oh, of course. So, life centered design basically asks us to think about the nature. But when we think about the nature, we need to make sure that we are broad in our definition for nature rather
Right.
than just physical elements like animals and plants. We're talking about every aspect of the nature. It's about the biodiversity, it's about the ecosystem, it's about the microbes. And life-centered design basically asks us to design with
Right.
all living things in mind, not just some aspects of it. And don't understand me wrong, of course, the users or human beings are still quite important for our projects, but not just the human beings. That's what life-centered design asks us to broaden our definition of the nature. Human beings are a part of the nature,
Right.
but not just one aspect of it.
Interesting. So, it's thank you for sharing that. So, it means that it's a concept where humans and planet all are part of life centered design.
Yes, it is basically says that when you're designing, you have to consider all kind of aspects in the nature. Human beings are part of it.
Right.
Human beings are part of the design genetically.
Right.
That's, of course, easier to understand. But of course, we're not just talking about the human beings or animals or plants, microbes, creating stable cycles for the seasons. For example, having drinkable water, having breathable air, and life-centered design, basically an approach to make sure that, yes, we have, simply because the ecosystems around us affecting us.
Right.
If the ecosystems around us are actually in crisis,
Right.
so are we at the end of the day. It's a ripple effect.
Yes.
And if the ecosystem around us is healthy,
Right.
so are we. So
Yes.
we're talking about the interconnected systems.
Interesting.
Everything is linked together, not just one aspect of it, but whatever is happening for one aspect of the nature,
Right.
creating a ripple effect and creating impacts on the other things next to each other. That's basically what life-centered design means, creating all living things in mind and creating spaces for everything, not just one or two aspects of the nature.
Wow, that's quite impressive. And what are the core elements that make up LCD or life centered design?
So when we were researching on the life-centered design, we consulted with different designer, expert, thought leaders all around the world to make
Right.
sure that we have the key ideas, case studies, and actionable insights for everyone to want to have more life-centered design approach connected with their current approaches. And
Right.
we come up with the 6 themes. This is designing all life equally, designing with nature, designing for good, designing in collaboration, designing for communities, and of course designing for good and past and future in mind at the same time. So these 6 themes are basically the core elements of the life-centered design.
Right.
You can have all of them, you can have some of them, but these all 6 themes basically summarizing how can you create spaces with all living things in mind.
Interesting. So, life centered design is not just a trend, it's more the overall abs- concept where it caters to well being and productivity of everyone.
Exactly. So when we're talking about the life-centered design, we need to underline that this is not a replacement.
Right.
It is a next step to our current approaches. For
Right.
example, when we're thinking about the current design approaches, we can easily say that occupant health and well-being are quite important, right? Whatever the space that we are creating at the end of the day. And life-centered design is actually here for supporting the well-being, productivity,
Right.
creativity of the user of the building. Because when we talk about the life-centered design, we have to talk about the biophilic design at the same time. Because biophilic design is basically says that all human beings genetically connected with nature.
Right.
When you think about our ancestral DNA, and when you think about how human beings are actually evolved in African savanna,
Yes.
and they lived in the savanna for millions of years. And
Exactly.
when you think about it,
Right.
cities are quite a new phenomenon, right?
Yes.
And nature provided us for us to survive. So that's that's what biophilic design says. It says that because biophilia means innate need to connect with nature. So it's a
Right.
need. It's not a luxury. So when you're surrounded with nature, that's when you feel the most secure, most peace, most let's say supported your well-being
Right.
at the end of the day. And biophilic design is a tool to create this connection. And
Right.
biophilic design is directly correlated with the life-centered design approaches as well. For example, if you are implementing biophilic design and life-centered design to your spaces, it doesn't matter what the function of the space. For example, it can be a workplace, it can be residential, it can be for a healthcare project.
Right.
If you have implemented like simple elements of the biophilic design, it improves your well-being by 10%. It improves your productivity by 6%. It improves your creativity for 10%. And if we are putting into perspective every kind of things, for example, think about the residential projects.
Yes.
Homes, our houses, our homes are the places that feel at most, we feel at most like secure, at peace. It's our refresh buttons, right?
Right.
And if we are going to, when we look at the developer side, when we talk about the residential projects, everyone is trying to create more likable places, places that actually people want to see themselves in living.
Right.
This is quite important because if you connect it with life-centered design, if you are actually using life-centered design for your residential projects, for example, it means that you're creating a habitat where people feel, yes, I want to live in that space. When you think about the workplace, people are spending 8 hours of their day in a workspace, right? And when you are using life-centered design approach for your workspaces, this is where people will, let's say, feel secure to work, feel more creative, feel more supported by their well-being. And it is also quite important, especially nowadays, because we have Gen Z started to work in the sector as well. And their experience of the workspace is also quite important for them. And when you have a space, a workspace, which actually allows you to connect with the nature, but in a broader definition of nature, let's say, it is also easier for them to work in these kind of environments at the same time.
Interesting. So coming back to this, when you say workplace with life-centered design, do you have any example where this has been implemented and the studies have shown that it had an effect on the well-being of the
There are actually
people?
many examples when you think about the supported well-being. But for example, if you just look into through lens of the life-centered design, there is just this amazing project, Biotop in France.
Right.
And it's an interesting project because the building itself used nature as a target user, not just something that you should add some plants or let's use some natural colors.
Exactly.
It didn't look like, the designer didn't look superficial about this. They used basically nature as a target user, and it allowed all kind of employees being able to connect with nature with every level of the building. And it's so great that its balconies, terraces, its all surrounding systems are actually created habitat for more than 65 different species of animals and also like 75 different species of plants. So it is it created an ecosystem within itself. This is actually one of the best examples that you can have.
Interesting. And you mentioned about biophilic design a couple of times. Is biophilic and life-centered design both are different concepts, or they are interrelated? Or if you can just explain
Not
in detail.
different at all. They are not separated contents at all. They are actually interconnected.
Okay.
If you are aiming for, or if you're using life-centered design guide to create your next space, you have to implement biophilic design in it. Because biophilia is, as I said, is a need for connecting with the nature. And life-centered design is actually saying that when you're creating a space, you need to put all living things in mind during your creative process. So they are actually inseparable and they're linked together.
Interesting. So now our listeners would like to know, especially those who are in property management and real estate development, who are the key stakeholders in implementing LCD in a new real estate project?
That is actually an amazing question.
Thank you.
Life-centered design basically says that it actually asks us to put stakeholders into account that traditionally we don't.
Right.
For example, when we talk about the themes, we were talking about designing in collaboration. There is a really nice case study about this in Berkeley School, Living Science Building in Seattle.
Right.
And the designer, what they did was basically taking into consideration the students' experience with the
Yes.
nature. And they ask students,
Wow.
how do you want to engage with the nature within this building? And since we're talking about the children,
Right.
the sky is the limit, right? They could
Yes.
think about anything, and they dreamt high. For
Right.
example, they said that, yeah, we want to have a river running across to the building. And usually when you have this kind of approaches, you would say, oh, that's not feasible, that's not right, we can't
Right.
do it, it will be too problematic. But no, they did it. And they integrated the rain collecting system
Okay.
to create this kind of river.
Interesting.
And yes, they had the rivers. They also asked for really big windows and let's say skylines, sky windows as well.
Okay.
Because basically they wanted to be in connect, not just about the interiors, but also they
Right.
wanted to be connected with the nature, with the sky, with the surrounding they're seeing from
Yes.
the outside. The one more interesting thing is they wanted a living green wall inside.
Nice.
But they said that it has to be living because we see green walls in the
Yes.
workspaces or in the residential areas as well. But they said that it has to be living. It's not. We don't want fake plants. We don't want waxed plants.
Right.
You know why? Because they
Yes.
wanted to see how the nature is changing through the seasons.
Exactly.
So the living wall will be changing the colors. They will be fading. They will be opening. They will be blooming. So they
Right.
would be experiencing the 4 seasons
Interesting.
inside as well.
Yes.
So when we think about the stakeholders, we need to think about a broader definition of the stakeholders. Yes,
Right.
developers, definitely.
Yes.
Designers, of course, definitely.
Yes.
Users, definitely. But ecosystems as well.
Right.
You need to be careful about where you are designing. And
Yes.
you need to not forget about community as well. Because
Right.
you're designing a building, you're designing a space. In a community, you have to take into consideration how this design will affect the community actually surrounding the space as well.
Right.
So these are the main stakeholders for me.
Interesting. So it's a collaborative effort by all the stakeholders, right from designers to investors to end users.
It is a holistic approach. It
Yes.
is definitely a holistic approach, also the stakeholder side as well. We need to make sure that everyone who are the part of this project needs to be aware and needs to be on board to creating
Right.
a life-centered design approach.
Interesting. So now, for our listeners to relate life-centered design, do you have any specific example where they can relate somewhere in our region like UAE or Gulf countries?
Yeah, we're talking about the research in here.
Right.
It has to be experienced, but based on my experience
Yes.
and based on my knowledge about the life-centered design, I think we have a couple of really good examples. The first one is Hidden Cafe. It's a really like pop-up cafe in the desert.
Right.
It's an amazing example. Why? Because it is not feeling like it's an addition to the desert. It's actually integrated with the desert.
Right.
And we need to be careful about when we talk about the nature, we need to think locally. This
Yes.
is quite important. Because when we talk about the UAE, for example, we
Right.
need to be careful about how we see the nature. It's not just about the green plants,
Yes.
but what is available, what is actually organic, what is really nature, what kind of nature that we have here. That is why Hidden Cafe is quite a really nice example, because
Interesting.
you're in the nature. You don't feel like you are aparted from the nature. You're actually integrated within it.
Right.
That's why when you are there, you feel safe, you feel at peace, you get really good time, and you're basically boosting your well-being. Another example is Bab al Shams
Right.
resort in Abu Dhabi. really, really nice example because it's also creating a really nice connection. It's not even a connection. It's like you belong in the nature when you are staying there. This is
Right.
quite important. And if you go, for example, a bit further, Alula in Saudi Arabia, another great example. Everything, all the design aspects. I'm not sure if the designers, when they're designing these three spaces,
Right.
were actually considering life-centered design. But I think they were just trying to create something good, not just for the human beings, not just for the residents, not just for the users, but they
Right.
just wanted to create something good for every aspect of the nature. And automatically it ended up with a
Interesting.
life-centered design approach.
Really good. So I really appreciate you shared the examples in pop-up cafe and a couple of examples in the UAE and GCC. So we understand about this. If I can ask you any more example across the globe apart from this 2-3 examples.
Oh, there is another really nice example in New Zealand, actually. Te Uravare.
Okay.
It's a community center. And this is actually correlates in the theme of the designing with community.
Okay.
So this space was designed for Tuho Nation in New Zealand. And it aimed to create a platform where Tuho Nation actually can create a connection and they can bond with their past, present, and future EV tribes.
Right.
And this designing with community just asks us to basically take examples or taking into consideration or experience of the indigenous people all around the world, because indigenous people all around the world are connected with their natural environments
Right.
within their cores, and they maintain this connection. And designing for community just basically means that you're creating a space,
Right.
how the community will get affected from the space. And this Te Uravare is basically a really nice example because it allowed all Tuho Nation come together anytime they want. They can connect it with each other, but
Right.
also they are connected with their past and
Yes.
future EV. This is actually quite important. And another one, for example, is in the Virginia Beach. This is actually quite a nice example for everyone,
Right.
because it's about taking into consideration nature when you design a space. So this is basically a space, really like a research space.
Yes.
But in 70s, there was a really, really nice setting of the nature. But after the Industrial Revolution, all the pledged soils, the nature was basically erased from the surface.
Okay.
But they took this opportunity to creating another project in this new settling. What they did was basically restoring the nature.
Nice.
And they actually implemented some trainings for the community around the project as well, because they wanted to make sure that the future generations will be advocating for their settles, for their nature as well. These are just a
Interesting.
few examples.
That's an impressive example. So, really great examples. Thank you for sharing that. And coming back to our last question, what is the message you have for our listeners about life-centered design and how it's going to play an important role in their daily life?
I just want to highlight that life-centered design is not a replacement
Right.
for any kind of approaches that we're doing currently. It is a next step.
Right.
It is a holistic approach. I think it is the future, because I think we all know that ecosystem is surrounding us is in crisis. That's why we are in
Yes.
crisis as well. And if we want to change that, if we
Right.
want to go through a more positive impact about everything that we are actually creating, we
Right.
need to make sure that we understand the life-centered design, and we need to rethink about who and what we are designing for.
Wow. Thank you. That was a great insight for our listeners, and thank you for your time today. And if you want to learn more about life-centered design, please follow the content. And thank you for joining us today at the Suited Realtor podcast.
Thank you so much for the opportunity again.